What happens when an elderly woman lets a silent stranger into her home just to give him something to eat. You won't believe how the mark on his hand turns her whole life upside down and brings back what she thought was lost forever. The house smelled of boiled beans and pine needles. The stove was still warm from the morning fire, but by noon the heat was beginning to dissipate into the corners, like yarn torn into tangled balls. Amara stood at the table, slowly grating carrots into a salad. Her hands moved on their own, as if they knew what to do. A sparrow chirped outside the window, as if scolding the whole world. She sighed. A pot bubbled on the stove. Thin steam hung over it, smelling of dill, meat, and what is called home. She took off the lid, stirred, and tasted it. The soup was just right. Not spicy, not salty, just right to warm you up, not to prove a point. She took a second plate, thought for a moment, set it down opposite her, and put it away. There was no one else to serve. Her son hadn't been around for a long time. Her daughter-in-law only called on business. Please give the keys to the neighbor, and anyway, maybe you should go to a friend's house? Amara had no friends. Her last friend had died on Easter 3 years ago, and since then she had talked either to her cat or to the mirror. At least the cat didn't care, but the mirror sometimes responded more rudely than she would have liked. She put a plate in front of her and poured some soup. She ate 2 spoonfuls and stopped. Her hunger subsided, but did not go away. The door creaked. She didn't flinch anymore. She was as old as the house itself. Everything creaked here. The floorboards and the memories. Her husband's coat hung on a hook. It was faded, but she couldn't bring herself to take it down. Sometimes she would grab it by the collar, as if he were still there. Amara went to the stove and turned it off. She poured the leftover soup into an enamel bowl and covered it with a rag. When it cooled down, she would take it to the old woman in the neighboring yard. The old woman's son was an alcoholic. Her daughter had left, and her legs no longer worked. Well, if she could warm up her dinner, then the day would not be wasted. The porch was damp. The snow was melting and dripping from the roof. A dull haze hung on the horizon. Not fog, not rain, but something in between. She put the bowl in her bag and threw her coat over her robe. Her fingers could hardly fasten the buttons, but she still did so with stubborn dignity. A man was standing in the street, a complete stranger. He was dressed strangely, in a worn coat, no hat, with a backpack on his back. His face was unshaven, his cheeks sunken, but his eyes were clear. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't from around here. He leaned against the fence, as if looking for a place to sit, but not allowing himself to fall. "Are you okay?" Amara asked. He nodded, uncertainly, but he nodded nonetheless. "Would you like some water? Or," she hesitated, "I have some soup." He nodded again. No words, only politeness in his tired eyes. Amara opened the gate and gestured for him to come in. He entered slowly, as if afraid of disturbing the air. Inside, she sat him down at the table, poured him some soup, and set out some bread. "Eat," she said. "Take your time." He nodded as if it were a matter of life and death. He ate in silence, using his left hand. His right hand was strangely clenched, as if he were hiding something. When he reached for the salt, Amara saw it. On his wrist was an old mark, a seal, burned like a brand, a broken circle with a symbol in the center. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that sign, and she shouldn't have seen it. She just wanted to warm a stranger with some soup. But what she saw on his hand brought back everything she had been trying to forget for decades. It only got worse from there. Don't miss what will change her forever. "You're completely crazy, Amara," her neighbor said, putting her hands on her hips and shaking her head. "You let anyone into your house and feed them. Today you gave him soup. Tomorrow, he'll pull out a knife. The woman stood at the gate with her arms crossed over her chest, as if defending her truth from the whole world. Her voice was loud, almost deliberately so that the others could hear, and the others, of course, heard. Because in places like this, everyone hears everything, even if they pretend to be busy with laundry or rakes. Amara didn't answer. She just leaned on the broom she was holding and wiped her hand on her apron. She looked straight ahead, without defiance, but without submission either. She just looked. There was no fear in her eyes. There was fatigue. So much that it was impossible to be angry with her. "You've always been too soft," her neighbor repeated emphatically. "That's why they walk all over you. Your husband walked all over you, and you said nothing. Your son wiped his feet on you, and you said nothing again. And now it's the same thing. You feel sorry for everyone, but who feels sorry for you?" Amara turned away, not because she was offended, because it hurt, because it was true. Not all of it, but a piece of it. And that piece hit her in the chest like a stone. She put the broom in the corner, took off her headscarf, and hung it on a nail. The house was silent. The warmth had gone. Only her heavy, even breathing remained. She went into her husband's room, not because she wanted to, but because her legs carried her there. The room hadn't changed in a long time. The bed was neatly made. A framed photograph stood on the nightstand, and a jacket hung on the back of a chair. There was dust on the jacket, and if you looked closely, you could see how it settled evenly over the years that had passed. Amara moved closer. She crouched down, as if she had dropped something. But nothing fell. Her hands were holding nothing but silence, and inside there was nothing either. Only one phrase that her neighbor had repeated like a mantra. "Too soft." She picked up the old photograph. It was black and white, faded. It was her and her husband. They were young. He had that look in his eyes that was both frightening and alluring. And she had a face that didn't yet know what betrayal was. She was holding his arm, looking at the photographer, as if she still believed that love could protect them. "If only I had left then," Amara whispered. "If I hadn't put up with it." But she didn't leave, and she didn't put up with it. She just kept quiet. At first, for the sake of the child, then for the sake of the neighbors, then for the sake of something that had long since died, but still lived on in her habits. The photograph trembled in her hand. She sighed and carefully put it back. There was a sound from the kitchen. Wood creaked. Someone approached the door. A man, the same one. He stood in the doorway, not like a thief, not like a neighbor, not like a son, like someone who brought someone else's pain in response to someone else's kindness. He spoke. His voice was hoarse, as if hoarse. He said something about lodging, about leaving. He offered to help with the housework if necessary. Amara nodded, not because she believed him, because believing was not a weakness. It was the only thing she had left. "There's a blunt axe in the shed," she said, "and the gate won't close. If you have hands, find something to do." He nodded and walked behind the house. She stayed behind. With a phrase that now sounded like a nail under her skin. "You've always been too soft." What she saw on his hand was only the beginning. Now you'll find out why her silence lasted a lifetime, and what will happen when it finally breaks. The climax is coming. Don't miss it. The morning began as usual. The stove, water, creaking floors, a short cough. Amara lived in a ritual she had created for herself, which didn't bother anyone and didn't concern anyone else. More accurately, everyone ignored it, pretending that it was the way things were supposed to be. It was always quiet in this house, but once upon a time, laughter rang out in the silence. It was small, hoarse, and warm. Now, the only sound in the silence was the clinking of glass and old dishes when the wind blew strongly from the north. Her son's room had been empty for a long time. She went there less and less often because every object in it was like a bitten apple. Nothing had been finished, drunk, or read. In the corner was a box of notebooks. He loved to draw when he was little. She kept one drawing on the sideboard. The three of them, hand in hand, under a tree, where something like a bear was sitting. Back then, he still called her Mommy. Now he just writes on the envelope, Amara Seelan. Recipient. Letters came rarely, but she kept them. Even if they didn't contain a greeting or, "How are you?" The last letter was elegantly dry. Please don't come for the New Year holidays. We will have many guests. Julia and I hope you understand. Pass the documents through a neighbor. She didn't pass them on, because the documents weren't just pieces of paper. They smelled of the past. His first school, his birth certificate, a photograph with his father, who was now called something else. A problem. A mistake. A man best forgotten. But he was his father. Her husband. He was who he was. Not an angel, but not a demon either. Just a man who had grown tired before his time. When he was dying, Amara held his hand. He didn't ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not tears. He repeated only one word, almost whispering. Take care. She never understood who he meant. Herself? Their son? Or himself? She never asked. It was never the right time. The neighbors now greeted her curtly, out of politeness, not out of desire. She didn't sit on the bench in front of the house, and there was no one else to sit with. The only person close to her, a woman named May, lived 2 houses down. She died in the spring, alone. Her body was found on the 3rd day. Amara went to the funeral in a black coat, which now hung in her closet as a reminder of those who still meant something to her. Her daughter-in-law rarely called. Most often it was to ask something. Where is the original certificate? Do you have any more photos of Lucas as a child? You're not planning to come in July, are you? There was always a slight irritation in Julia's voice. It was as if Amara was not family, but an inconvenience, a forgotten item on a to-do list, someone to remember when filling out a form. Amara was not angry. No, anger is for those who hope. She no longer hoped. She just waited. Those are 2 different things. Hope requires participation. Waiting is just time. On the day the traveler stayed to spend the night in the old barn, Amara woke up earlier than usual. It was still dark, but she got up as if on cue. She stared at the ceiling, counted the cracks, listened to her breathing. She cooked him porridge, just plain, with water. She added a pat of butter, which melted slowly, like someone else's gratitude. She took the plate to the barn. He was already awake. He was sitting on a box, wrapped in the old blanket she had given him. He didn't look her in the eye. Eat, she said. He nodded. Thank you. She was alarmed by the way he held the spoon, carefully, as if he hadn't eaten in a long time, but knew how. Not a vagrant. Not a thief. Someone who had lost his way, but not himself. That on your arm, she began, but he looked up sharply. Just an old story, he said. She nodded. She didn't press the matter, but inside, something stirred. Because it wasn't just anything. It was something from the past that people don't ask about unless they're ready to hear the answer. In the evening, by the stove, she found an old magazine. She began to leaf through it, and suddenly she saw the same stamp, the mark her husband had once used to mark wooden beams. His own mark. No one but him knew it. No one else used it. Not before, not after. She put the magazine down. She closed her eyes. Her chest tightened. Too soft? Maybe. But softness is not weakness. It is what remains when everything else has been taken away. By evening, it had warmed up. The snow slid heavily from the roof, crunching like an old grudge off the tongue. Amara hung out the blanket, the one she had given to the stranger. He didn't mind. He helped around the yard in silence. He repaired the crooked gate and cleared the debris from the shed, as if he knew exactly where to put his hands. There was no laziness or fear in his movements, only fatigue, the kind that cannot be slept away. When she brought him a mug of tea, he was sitting on a low bench against the wall, his sleeves rolled up. Under his wrist was an old, burnt mark, the same mark. He didn't notice her looking. He was lost in thought, staring at the ground as if the answer was there. She froze. At first her breathing faltered. Then it echoed in her chest, her stomach, her throat, as if someone had run their fingers over all her old scars at once. Only one person had carved that mark, her husband. No one knew that he had burned it into wood, into skin, into iron. It was his way of marking what was important, things he was responsible for, and people, those he couldn't protect any other way. Amara didn't approve, didn't understand, but she accepted it. Because back then she still believed that if a person does something strange, it means they have their own pain. And if you love someone, you don't demand explanations. She returned to the house. She closed the door, leaned against the wall, and suddenly she remembered how once more than 20 years ago there was a knock at the door, late at night. Her husband opened it, and there was a teenager, beaten, trembling. Not a word, just this sign carved on a piece of plywood in his hands. Her husband took him into the shed, gave him something to eat, then sent him away. She didn't ask. He said, "It's better not to know, Amara." And she didn't know, until today. Now she was facing a grown man, with the same sign, with the same look, and with the same silence. She went to the mirror in the hallway. She looked at herself. Her face was pale, her lips thin. In this reflection was a woman who had lived someone else's life, who had been silent for too long, because that was all those around her expected. And now it was as if someone had opened a box she had buried inside herself decades ago. And out of it came something that cannot be put into words. Fear, memory, anger, tenderness, confusion. She opened the chest. At the very bottom, wrapped in a towel, lay a note. An old yellow sheet of paper with a man's handwriting. A few words. If he comes with this sign, don't send him away. He's not to blame. Her hand trembled. Not from old age, but from clarity. Amara straightened up. The paper trembled, but her gaze did not. She went out into the yard. He was still sitting by the wall, as if waiting. "What's your name?" she asked. He looked up. Slowly. "Rael," he replied. She nodded. The wind tore a piece of fabric from the fence. A neighbor's cat ran past. Inside Amara, something shifted. It wasn't pain or relief. It was something else. Something unknown. But it was alive. Amara didn't sleep that night. She sat in a chair with her legs wrapped in a blanket, staring at the flames in the stove. The fire burned calmly, but a completely different flame raged in her head. Slow, sticky, giving her neither sleep nor silence. Rael lay down in the barn. He said it would be more honest that way. He refused a bed or a lamp. The word honest rang in her ears like keys in an empty house. Too rarely did people speak like that, asking for nothing in return. Her husband had once uttered those words. Once. And then he disappeared for several days. He returned with bruises and the smell of burning on his jacket. Amara remembered. She didn't want to, but she remembered. She remembered how her husband had brought someone to his workshop, How the door slammed. How later, already at night, he sat on the edge of the bed and smoked. Not as usual, quietly, but with such heaviness that the smoke seemed to come not from the cigarette, but from his heart. Then he said to her, "If I die, don't look for reasons. Everything is clear." And now, a man with his mark was sleeping in her yard, with his silence, with the same sloping shoulders, the same expression, as if he were carrying someone else's sins. Amara got up. She went to the window. The yard was empty. Only a lantern swayed in the wind, casting her own shadow on the wall. Too soft, her neighbor's words came back to her. But what if she wasn't soft? What if she started talking, screaming? But to whom? Her son didn't respond to her letters. The last time she spoke to him in person was a year ago. The conversation was about a loan he had asked for, not for himself, as if that made it easier, as if saying for Julia would lessen the shame. Amara helped. She sold her old gold and gave it to him. He thanked her curtly. After that, silence. And now there was someone else in her house who was connected to her husband, not directly, not by blood, but by something warm and strange. And this was perhaps the only person in recent years who had looked at her as something other than a nuisance. But if she asked, everything would change. Words cannot be taken back. Confessions destroy what is familiar. And the familiar, even if it is rotten, is safe. In the morning, she boiled water. She put the kettle on the edge of the table. She went to the shed. He was sitting there, repairing an old knife. His movements were slow and focused. It was as if he was repairing himself rather than the blade. "Did you have a father?" she asked. He didn't look up. "I did." "Is he alive?" Silence, then a nod. "I don't know." And silence again. It was as if every word was a stone that had to be carried across a field. "The mark on your arm. Did you do that yourself?" He looked straight at her. His eyes were dark and tired. "Someone did it, a long time ago." "Who?" Rael looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "One person. He said I would be needed. Someday." She nodded. "And are you?" "I don't know," he exhaled. "I'm just walking." Amara sat down next to him. She looked at her hands. Blue veins, thin skin. And she thought, what if I tell him? About the letter, about her husband, about the mark. But then something tightened inside her. If I say it out loud, everything will fall apart. The next morning was especially quiet. Even the birds seemed to have paused, like people before saying something important. Snow lay in flakes, like powder. Only near the porch had it melted. Rael had cleared all the ice in the evening without asking. Amara woke up early, not because of the cold or the noise. She just knew that today something had to be different. She washed her face and tied a dark scarf around her head. She stared at herself in the mirror for a long time without turning away. That face knew everything. About pain, about humiliation, about the love that, as it turned out, did not heal, but only tightened the noose. She no longer wanted to carry this knowledge alone. Rael was drinking tea on the porch. He hardly moved, just wrapped his hands around the mug as if warming himself rather than the tea. Amara sat down next to him. She said calmly, even gently, but without weakness, "I'll show you something." He raised his eyebrows in surprise, but didn't ask a single question. He just stood up and followed her into the house. She walked slowly, as if testing each step for strength. In the hallway stood a chest. It was old, with 3 crossbars. Her husband had made it, without a single nail, just wood, glue, and his hands. She opened it, removed 2 layers of towels. Underneath was a plywood box wrapped in a rag. Inside was a piece of paper, almost worn away. But the symbol was still legible, the same one that had been on Rael's hand. At the bottom was an inscription in a man's handwriting. "If he comes with this, take it. He is part of it." Amara handed the paper to him. He didn't take it right away. He looked at it as if he were seeing it for the first time. He didn't finish. "My husband," she said. Rael carefully took the paper. He read it for a long time. Then he sat down on the floor. His shoulders slumped. Everything he carried inside him suddenly became heavy. "I didn't know," he said. "I thought it was just a mark." "No," Amara replied. "It was a promise." They sat in the hallway, on the floor among old boxes, useless things, and the smell of years gone by. There was more truth in that than in all the conversations of the past 10 years. "Did you know him?" she asked quietly. Rael nodded. Then he shook his head. "I remember his voice. He said I wasn't alone, that if I didn't give up, one day I would find where I belonged. Back then, it sounded like a fairy tale. And now..." He fell silent. His lips trembled. Not from the cold, but from the emotions coming out like old smoke from a chimney. Amara looked at him and didn't see a stranger. She saw a stranger who, for some reason, felt closer than family. She saw a face that had something of her husband in it, not outwardly, inwardly. A simple gaze, not begging, but open. She stood up. "I can't give you back your past, and you can't give me mine. But if you want, you can stay." Rael stood up slowly. "I want to, but not as a guest." "Then grab a bucket," she said with a dry, almost tender smile. "It's time to clean the basement. Spring is coming, they say." And he nodded. There were no more words. But something else began. Every day at the same time, a girl appeared at Amara's house. She was thin, wearing a worn coat, with a ridiculously tied scarf and bangs that had obviously been cut in the kitchen. She always stopped at the old fence, took a crust of bread out of her pocket, and began to crumble it into the snow for the pigeons. At first, Amara watched from the window, without irritation, but also without involvement, just out of habit, like looking at the clock when you're not expecting anyone. But on the 4th day, she finally went out. "If you run away, you'll freeze your feet," she said, standing on the porch. The girl wasn't scared. She just looked serious, with an adult gaze. "I'm not running away. I'm sitting." Amara snorted, not loudly, just under her breath. "Sitting? Standing? Well, if it hurts to sit inside, it seems easier outside," said the girl, and she buried her face in her palm with the bread again. After that, they started talking. Not every day, not for long, but the words seemed to flow between them naturally, without pressure. The girl called herself Esme. Her mother worked in a bakery. Her father had gone away, as people say when they know that no one is coming back. Esme brought little notes. She drew faces and animals on them, sometimes just a dot, and said it was silence. Amara put these pieces of paper in a tin tea box. She didn't know why, but each one was like a breath, like a sign that the world was still moving, albeit slowly. One day, Esme came later than usual. Her eyes were red. She sat down by the fence and was silent for a long time. Amara went out and sat down next to her. "What happened?" The girl shrugged. "I was called unnecessary." "By whom?" "My uncle's new wife. She said that if it weren't for me, my mother would be better off." Amara felt something old stir inside her. She had heard that phrase before, Almost the same words. Only not from a stranger, from her own mother. "I've heard that," she said quietly. "Really? Really? And even worse." She looked at the girl. "Do you know what I did then?" "What?" She paused. Esme wiped her nose on her sleeve. "And did it work?" "No," Amara smiled. "But now I know it was the stupidest thing I ever did, because when you don't say anything, they think you agree." They sat there for a while longer. Then Amara went into the house and brought back an apple and an old woolen scarf. "Here, not for beauty, for your throat." Esme nodded. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "Of course. Just bring more bread. These pigeons are getting cheeky." As she was leaving, the girl suddenly said, "You're not like a grandmother. You're like a tree that hasn't been cut down." Amara didn't answer. She only felt something stir inside her. Not pain, not longing. Something alive, warm. Not about the past, about the present. Rael repaired the gate in 2 days. Not in a rustic, makeshift way, but as if he were building it for himself. Smooth, neat. He even oiled the hinges. Amara stood at the porch for a long time afterward, slamming them, as if to check. Was this really real? He didn't ask for anything. He ate what he was given. He worked silently, but not sullenly, just focused. When he spoke, it was to the point. When he laughed, it was quietly, genuinely. Amara restrained herself from asking unnecessary questions. She was afraid of scaring him away. It was all too fragile, but alive. He helped clean out the attic. There was so much dust that every breath echoed in her chest. They found an old lamp, a clock, 2 pairs of felt boots, a clay doll with no eyes, a gift from her son on spring day, and a box of letters. Amara didn't open it. She just pressed it to her chest, as if her body would decide when it was time. During the day, they worked around the house. They planted onions, repaired the runners on the sled, and whitewashed the stove. Sometimes Rael would look up and ask, "Are you sure we don't need to do that?" "There's no such thing as too much when you have hands," Amara would reply. Or, "When you're getting in the way, I'll tell you. For now, grab the rake, son." He smiled, not immediately, not broadly, but with a warmth that had been absent from this house for a long time. In the evenings, she baked flatbread. Not out of a desire to cook, but out of memory. Her mother used to do this when she wanted to warm something other than her body. Rael ate slowly, gratefully. Once he even washed the dishes, and Amara almost cried. Not because of the gesture, but because someone in this house had simply noticed that she was tired. Esme came almost every day. She would sit on the porch, sometimes bringing a pie her mother had baked. Once she brought a book. Rael sat down next to her, and they read aloud together. Amara listened from the kitchen and caught herself thinking, "There he is, my grandson, just as I imagined him when I thought about how everything would be." But then night would come, and with the night came the voices of the past. Her husband arguing with someone by the barn, her son slamming the door, her daughter-in-law whispering through clenched teeth, "Your poverty is no excuse." And again the same phrase from her neighbor, "You're too soft, that's why they walk all over you." One day at dinner, Rael asked, "Why did you stay alone?" Amara didn't answer right away. She wiped her hands on her apron. She poured tea. Only then did she say, "Because I didn't leave in time. Because I believed that if I endured, things would get better." It grew quiet. He didn't argue. He just said, "But you're not a bad person. There's no point in being angry. It just rots you from the inside. And if you're going to rot, at least don't stink." They both laughed, awkwardly, like children, but this laughter was like a sunbeam on the floor, unnecessary, but comforting. One day she saw Rael sitting in her husband's workshop. Everything was almost as it had been. The tools, the workbench, the old gloves. He was holding an axe in his hands, running his finger along it. Not like a man who wants to strike, like someone who remembers that it hurts. "Did he teach you?" Rael nodded. "A few weeks," then he said. "You're not my son, but I'll leave you something." "What?" Rael paused. "Nails. And a hammer." Amara snorted. "Generous." "The most valuable thing I had," he replied. By evening, the house smelled of bread, iron, and presence. Not just people, but the fact that someone was breathing within these walls again. Someone was walking, moving a chair, opening a cupboard, dropping a spoon. And Amara suddenly understood. This was it. Not happiness. Not forgiveness. Just life. The kind that passes you by if you don't let it in. But there was something else in the air. Something subtle. Almost imperceptible. Like the wind before a storm. The letter arrived at the end of the week. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, the handwriting neat but unfamiliar. Amara knew immediately that it wasn't from her son. He wrote awkwardly, like someone who is always in a hurry, even when he's lying. She put the letter on the table and didn't open it for an hour. She just sat there, watching the sun move across the edge of the tablecloth. Rael had gone to the village to arrange for boards for the barn. Esme hadn't come today, and in this strange silence, the envelope seemed to breathe on its own. When she finally cut open the edge, her hands were shaking. The letter was unsigned, just dry text, short. "If you really are who you were to him, don't get involved. This man is not who he claims to be. Don't believe your eyes. He is not family. He was there at the worst moment. The rest is a myth. It's better if he leaves, before it's too late." Amara finished reading. She sat down. The paper fell to the floor. Nothing happened. No crash, no tears. Only her stomach felt cold, like in a basement where a mouse had been walled up long ago. The letter wasn't for her. It was against her. Against what she had begun to believe in. Against the peace she feared but craved so much. Against Rael. But who wrote it? Her son? Julia? Someone who wasn't here? Someone who didn't see him cleaning the pipes, reading to the girl, sitting in her husband's workshop as if he wanted to absorb the last of his breath? Amara picked up the letter. She read it again. The words hadn't changed, but now there was a hint of fear in them, and a question. What if? What if it was all a mistake? Rael returned in the evening. He brought 2 sacks of potatoes, some boards, and a pie from the bakery for Esme. He put everything down neatly and sat down on the stool, as always. "Why are you so quiet?" Amara didn't answer. She just nodded toward the letter. He didn't understand at first. Then he picked it up. He read it. His face didn't change. Only his lips grew thinner. "I knew she would find me one day," he said. "Who?" Amara's voice broke, hoarse. "One person. He was there when it happened. When my father died. He thought it was my fault, even though I was only 12. He exhaled heavily, as if pulling a nail out of his chest. "I didn't ask you to believe me. I just wanted to breathe, just a little." And at that moment, she saw him. Her husband. Not his face, not his gait, but this silence, this pain that didn't scream, but nestled under his skin like salt in a wound. "I won't send you away," she said. But you have to understand, everything is different now. Rael nodded. I understand. But something stood between them, thin as a film, but indestructible. And it didn't disappear, even when they had dinner together, even when he washed the dishes again, even when she wished him good night. Because now there was a question in the house, and no one knew whose side he was on. 2 days later, his son called. Not, how's it going, or are you still alive? But straight to the point, in a voice trained for meetings and reprimands. Mom, I know he's with you. I got a call. Who they? People who care. They said you're harboring some kind of crook who... He hesitated, then spat out. Who was involved in things that aren't meant for our circle. You know what I mean? Amara sat on a stool by the phone, staring at the floor. The wall next to her was worn down to the wood. Her hand had touched that spot for decades as she called, waited, and remained silent. Now that wall had heard everything. I know who he is, she said. No, Mom, you think you know, but he's a stranger. He's not family. He has no right to live with you. You don't understand how this could affect us. Amara suddenly laughed, quietly, hollowly, bitterly. Us? Since when did you include yourself in us? There was silence on the other end. Then the sound of breathing. And again, a voice, but this time with emphasis. If he doesn't leave, I won't be able to support you anymore. Julia is categorically against it, and I don't want my grandson associating with just anyone. He doesn't even know my name, she said calmly. Don't worry, he won't associate with him. He hung up. No goodbye, no mom, just silence, as if he had pressed the cancel button on his whole life. In the evening, the neighbor came over, the same one who used to throw phrases at her as she passed by, but now she came with a straight face. I heard you took in an ex-convict? Amara looked at her without surprise. I heard. Aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid to live with a husband who beats you when he's drunk? She flashed an angry look. That's different. Of course it's different. For you, it's a habit. For me, it's a choice. The neighbor left, slamming the gate behind her. Amara stood at the window, motionless. Inside, she could feel the rumbling that precedes a storm. Everything she had built over the past few weeks, small, fragile, but real, was now cracking at the seams. Outside, the pressure was mounting. Inside, there was doubt. Rael noticed it. He didn't ask. He just became quieter, started leaving more space, leaving early in the morning and coming back late. It was as if he wanted to give her a choice, let her decide for herself, without words. One day she woke up and he was gone. No note, no noise, no mug on the table. Only emptiness, which contained everything. Anxiety, guilt, anger, fear. Amara went to the attic. She opened the box of letters she had hidden. She took the first one she found. Her son's handwriting. There were words. You always choose the wrong ones. You always stand up for the weak, forgetting that we are your family. She clenched the letter. The paper crinkled. What if family is those who don't let you breathe, who measure love by convenience, who blackmail kindness? By evening, Rael returned. He sat down on the porch without a word. His eyes were red, his hands covered in dust. He was carrying something. A small bundle wrapped in newspaper. He handed it to her. I found it in the workshop. It's his plane. I just wanted to clean it. I'm sorry if... She didn't take it. She just looked at it. Then she sat down next to him. You know what the hardest thing is? What? Hearing people yell at you that you're not family when you're the first one who understood who I am. They sat there in the twilight. The house creaked around them like an old boat. If someone had asked how much longer it would hold, no one would have been able to answer. The snow melted in a single day, as if the earth was tired of holding the weight of strangers. Mud oozed from under the thin crust of ice, like the past oozes from unspoken words. The roof began to leak. Towards morning, the ceiling in one of the rooms collapsed. The old boards couldn't withstand the water. Amara stood with a bucket, listening to the dripping, and did nothing. Rael left again. Without a word, without bread, without a glance. The house settled. Literally. The floorboards sagged. The doors creaked more plaintively than usual. And inside Amara, something cracked too. Not loudly, but permanently. Like a finger that no longer bends. She sat in the kitchen and sorted through old spoons. Not because she had to. Because there was nothing else to do. No cooking. No waiting. No fighting. Her hand slid over the metal, and each spoon was like a name that no one had called in a long time. Her son hadn't called. Esme hadn't come by. Her neighbor passed by once, turned away. The second time, she threw a newspaper at the gate like a bone. The third time, she didn't even stop. And that was worse. The letter was lying on the table again. Read, agonized over, but not thrown away. Like all the accusations we hold on to, even if we pretend we've forgotten. She picked it up, went to the stove, threw it inside. The paper swirled like a snake, flared up, and disappeared. No smell, no ashes. Only her heart tightened, because now there was nothing to be angry about. In the evening, she took a photograph off the wall. It was of her and her husband. He was looking away. She was looking at the camera. Her smile was naive, like a woman who believes that everything is still ahead of her. She took a pair of scissors. She cut herself out. Then she cut him out. There was a white void between them, just as it had been in reality. It rained during the night. Amara woke up to the sound of tapping on the roof. For a second, she thought someone was calling her. She ran out into the yard. It was empty, only wet grass, an old bucket, and Esme's forgotten scarf, soaked with moisture. She grabbed it and pressed it to her chest, and suddenly, tears. Not drops. A flood, as if all the ice inside her had melted. But it was too late. She fell to her knees in the mud, not from weakness, from the fact that there was no point in standing anymore. Everything that had held her back let go, and she let go too. "That's it," she said into the darkness. "I give up." And that was the most frightening admission, because now there wasn't even a habit left. Only her body. Only the rain. Only an old woman in the mud whom no one was waiting for. Not in the morning. Not later. Not ever. That night, Amara didn't sleep. Not because she was thinking. She couldn't think. Her head was like a broken pot. Empty. Ringing. Useless. She lay there, covered with a blanket, listening to the dripping from the ceiling, and didn't move. Her body was damp. Her chest felt like cotton wool, and her stomach was empty. Sometimes fragments came back to her, not thoughts, but memories, like black and white photographs. There she is ironing her son's shirt, and he says, "I don't want you to come to school. You're not like other mothers." There she is holding her husband's hand, and he, drunk, whispers, "If you were stronger, everything would be different." There she is, listening to her daughter-in-law explain to her grandson, "Grandmother is just a word. Real grandmothers live in the city." And again, dripping. Drip. Drip. Like a sentence. Like a report. Not of the clock, but of the heart. Shame. That was the most accurate word. Not anger, not pain. Shame. Shame for believing too much, for keeping quiet when she should have spoken up, for taking back those who only came for money or documents, for being afraid of losing those who had long since lost her. Shame for not screaming when she was wiped on the floor, for wearing old clothes because she was afraid of being pushy, for not picking up someone else's grandson because that's the way it should be, for looking at the floor instead of people's eyes. The shame doesn't go away. It just changes clothes. Yesterday, it was in the form of resentment. Today, it's in the form of silence. Tomorrow, it will be in the face of her neighbor, her son, an empty room, an abandoned letter. In the morning, she got up. She took a bucket and a rag. She washed the floor. She wiped the windowsill, not out of strength, but out of stubbornness. Then she sat down on a stool and spoke aloud. Not loudly, but with every word. It was as if she were peeling off old skin. I was a good mother, as good as I could be. I was a wife, even when he wasn't a husband. I didn't betray anyone. I just waited too long. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, a voice came. Not from outside, from inside, her father's voice. No, not her father's. The voice of the man she had called that when she was a child. The old man who lived across the street and once said to her, "Amara, if you want to be heard, first believe that you have the right to be heard." She opened her eyes, and in that kitchen, dirty, old, forgotten, it suddenly became light. Not from the lamp, from the silence that was no longer a punishment. It became space. She took out her son's letter, the last one, yellowed, dry with the words, "You're making everything complicated. We just want to live in peace." And she suddenly replied, not on paper, but out loud, "I just want to live." And that was the beginning, not of a new life, but of a new relationship with her own. The morning was warm, but without promise, like a person who has learned not to wait for the sun, but still goes out onto the porch. Amara stood barefoot, a mug of cold tea in her hands, watching the wind blow dust across the yard. Everything was in its place. The crooked bench, the hole in the fence, the old cat bowl. Only she was gone, the one who had been lying on the kitchen floor yesterday, with a wet handkerchief and a voice that no one could hear. Today she was standing, not in victory, not at peace, just standing, steady, confident, with a body that was no longer a shadow. Rael arrived in the afternoon, slowly, as if checking to see if he could return. In his hands was an axe, old and restored, like a symbol, like a gesture. Amara came out to meet him. "I found another chest, under the porch," he said. "With iron. I think he left it." "He left a lot," she replied calmly. They stood facing each other, without guilt, without drama, just two people tired of someone else's past. Rael looked into her eyes. "I don't know who wrote that letter, but if you—" She raised her hand, stopped him. "I don't need an answer. I need a place." "A place?" "Yes. In this house, in this life, in this truth. No explanations, no roles. Not as a mother, not as a widow, not as an old woman who feels sorry for everyone, just as a person who has a right." Rael nodded, not out of politeness, out of understanding. She took out the box of letters. She opened it. She took out the very first one, where her son still wrote, "Mom." The handwriting was uneven, the ink blue, stained with tea. She read it, slowly, Then she tore it up. Not with anger, but with gratitude. For what it was. But now, it was gone. Each letter went into the stove, not out of revenge. It was a farewell. Rael silently stacked the wood. Then he said, "I can leave if you want me to." Amara looked at him. "Number, go if you want to. But if you stay, it's not out of pity. It's because you're part of me. Not my blood, but something I've finally come to call my own." He smiled, with a faint, honest curve of his lips. "Then I'll stay. Then get the bucket. We'll wash together." They went into the house. It smelled of smoke, onion skins, and a place. The kind of place you can't buy, earn, or beg for. The kind of place you can only endure. In the evening, Esme came. Without a word, she handed her a drawing. It was a house. The windows were lit, and there were 3 people, a woman, a man, and a girl. They were all holding hands. Amara looked at it. "Who are they?" "Those who have a place," Esme replied, and Amara sat down next to her. She was silent, but for the first time, there was no pain in that silence. Her son arrived unexpectedly. He didn't call or send a message. It was evening. The stove was crackling, and the house smelled of baked beets and kerosene. The car stopped at the gate. He got out, wearing a dark jacket, his face the same as always, distant, focused, as if he was constantly making important decisions. He didn't say hello. He just stood at the gate. "Are you coming?" he asked. Amara wiped her hands on her apron and went out. The door didn't slam. It just closed quietly behind her. "Come in if you came to talk." He entered and took off his gloves. His gaze darted around the kitchen, as if looking for something to find fault with. Then he saw Rael, who was coming out of the workshop, holding a can of nails. "Are you still here?" his son asked, not looking his mother in the eye. "Yes," Rael replied calmly, "but I can leave if you want." Number Y need to talk to her. Rael nodded. He put the jar on the shelf and left. No hard feelings. Like a man who understands that someone else's family is always a minefield. They were left alone. They sat opposite each other. The kettle whistled, but no one poured tea. Silence stretched between them like an old, cracked clothesline. "You let him in yourself, against my will. You haven't been in this house for a long time. Your will doesn't live here. He's using you. And you?" He froze. He looked as if he saw someone else in her. "I supported you. I helped you. In 2 years, 3 transfers. In 8 years, not a single hug. I didn't know how to deal with you. You didn't need to know how. You just needed to come. Just ask. Just be there." He lowered his eyes. "Do you want me to apologize?" Number, I want you to hear me. I'm tired of being soft so you don't get hurt. Tired of keeping quiet so you wouldn't feel guilty. Tired of pretending that it doesn't hurt when you say, "We just want to live in peace." He sighed heavily, rubbed his face with his hands. "We're different, Mom. You live by your feelings. I live by my actions. I thought we were just a family." He fell silent. Then he stood up. He walked to the door. "I don't know what to say." "Then I'll say it." She stood up, straight, with her back straight, without anger, only with what had been building up inside her for years. "I'm not throwing you out of my life. But I'm not going to sit by the phone anymore. I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to beg. I've told you everything. Now it's up to you. Either you come back as a son, not as a prosecutor, or don't come back at all." He stood there, his face turned pale, his shoulders slumped. But he didn't say anything. He just opened the door and left. Amara closed the door behind him. She returned to the kitchen. Rael stood at the doorway, silent. Did he leave? Yes, she nodded. Will he come back? She looked out the window. Spring was outside. The ground was still damp, but the snow would not return. Let him decide for himself. I'll stay. Rael nodded and went back to stacking boards against the wall, as if he had always lived here, as if he had never left. The kettle was boiling on the stove. Amara stood by the window, her shoulders covered with an old scarf, sweeping crumbs off the table. The stove crackled as if talking to the house. Esme's scarf lay on the windowsill, washed and smelling of chamomile. In the corner was Rael's toolbox, neatly stacked. Everything was in its place. Everything was hers. A clock hung on the wall, long since stopped. She didn't wind it. Time no longer dictated the terms in this house. It simply was. It passed like the wind, like water, like pain, when you already know how to live with it. Her son hadn't called. But now it didn't matter, because there was life in the house. Unpretentious, quiet, real. No musts, no waits, no silences. There were 2 mugs on the table. One was hers. The other was for those who didn't ask permission to be there but stayed anyway. Rael entered quietly so as not to disturb the silence. There, by the shed, a bird is building a nest. We'll have to be quiet for a couple of days. And don't burn it down, she replied. He nodded and sat down next to her. Evening was falling outside. The house was breathing. The kitchen was warm. And inside, Amara felt something she had denied herself for so long. Peace. Not as a pause, but as a choice. If you have ever felt betrayed by those you protected, this story may be too close to home. Write the word dignity in the comments if you also believe that even in silence, you can remain strong. And don't forget to subscribe. Here we talk about things that are usually kept quiet.